Be Wealthy and Smart, episode 668.
Step into a world of wealth and financial freedom without budgets, boredom, or bosses on Be Wealthy and Smart. And now, here's your host, Linda P. Jones.
Welcome to Be Wealthy and Smart. I'm Linda P. Jones, America's Wealth Mentor, empowering women and men worldwide to financial freedom. On today's show, we're going to talk about what is it really like to be a billionaire, or maybe a centimillionaire, someone with $100 million. And to do that, we have my friend Richard C. Wilson back for his third time on the podcast. Richard C. Wilson helps $100 million plus net worth families create and manage their single family offices and currently manages 14 clients, including 3 billionaire families. Richard is also the founder of the Family Office Club, the largest membership-based family office association with over 1,500 registered family office members. Richard has the Family Office podcast, has the #1 best-selling book in the family office industry, which is called The Single Family Office, Creating, Operating, and Managing the Investments of a Single Family Office, and a book called How to Start a Family Office, Blueprints for Setting Up Your Single Family Office. Richard has his undergraduate degree from Oregon State University, his MBA from the University of Portland, and he lives in Key Biscayne, Florida with his wife and 3 daughters. Richard is going to give us a glimpse into the real world of the wealthy. We talk about a lot of interesting topics. Things like, what is the #1 mistake that wealthy people make? What are the best states for the wealthy to live in the United States? And you'll be surprised to hear there's only 4 that Richard recommends. You'll also hear Richard give some cautionary advice about how not to become a target and why it's less popular than ever among the wealthy to own multiple homes. If you've ever wondered what it's like to have a lot of wealth, it might be much different than you think. And Richard keeps our feet on the ground with giving us real-world advice that just might surprise you. I had so much fun talking with him. I know you're going to enjoy this podcast. Here we go. Hi, Richard. It's really great to have you back on Be Wealthy and Smart. Welcome.
Thank you, Linda. Glad to be here.
Well, we've talked a couple of times in the past about billionaires, and today I thought it would be fun to take a different perspective with the ultra wealthy and talk about housing, because I heard you mention on a podcast that sometimes it is something that gets a little bit over budget for people who have just had a liquidity event. So let's start with that. Let's say someone sold a business and came into $500 million. So typically, what happens on the fund side? We're not going to talk about the business side because I know you're going to take good care of them. But what happens on the fund side? What do they start thinking about doing with their money on the fund side?
So it's interesting. I think at the core of it, right after a liquidity event, but even on an ongoing basis, what they usually find is that things start to bore them a bit. You know, they run out of things you can buy. Even on their way up, someone with a liquidity event that big was probably making $5 million a year or more along the way, or at least a few million a year. So once you get to making 7 figures, you know, most things, tangible things, you know, start to bore you. And so you start to want novel experiences more. And travel a lot more. And so connected to the answer to your question is they want to go to some of those bucket list locations. When they're there, they want 5-star treatment and low chaos and low annoyances along the way, and to be taken care of along the way so they can get some business done along the way. Many times people think they're going to be free after a liquidity event, but they haven't earned out. They're on 5 different boards now. They have lots of exciting new opportunities. So they still need to be protected from a bunch of chaos and noise. They can spend their time wisely while traveling. And so the most common thing is this combination of travel, which could be private jet travel, acquiring a couple private jets, or just having those luxury travel experiences. And, you know, the main purpose of us doing this interview here today also sometimes buying a very large, expensive house, which could be in the fun category, or in their mind, it might just be the practical and they deserve it type category. But I think the most fun thing are those novel experiences that they're seeking at that level.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So, if they were going to buy a larger home, because now they can certainly afford a much larger home than they could before, what do you think is the mistake that most people make? Because you talked about people spending too much on that home, right?
Right. And, so people can relate to it. Our smallest client is a dentist who's worth $14 million. And then our largest family is worth over $10 billion. But a lot of them are in that range that you mentioned, a couple hundred million in assets. But several are below 100 million. I think it's important to point out that the very common mistake among all of them, though, is to buy too expensive of a home at the top of a market and top of the range of what a home goes for in an area. So they might go to an island on Hawaii or an area in San Diego or Chicago, etc., and go to an expensive neighborhood, but then get the best of the best property that's maybe been sitting on the market for 7 to 10 years. And maybe they'll negotiate a little bit and have a broker that does a bit of a job, getting the price down a little bit, but they could have negotiated much harder for longer and played different groups against each other who have all had their houses on the market for 5 or 10 years. And they know there's not very many buyers in the market who can afford the $8 or $12 or $18 million home. And, that's a big mistake because it usually is something they're bored of after a year or two. They've usually overpaid for the asset. It's slow to unwind. And usually within a few years, they have multiple new homes and they're traveling nonstop and they never even spend time inside of the $15 million home that they acquired.
Yeah. And then it's got to be really difficult to keep it up too, right? I mean, they need staff, they need gardeners, they need a lot of attendants to just take care of it, even if they're not there, don't they?
Right. Usually, it depends on how many full-time staff you want to have in the home, but kind of a good, base cost for management of a home could be $7,000 to $10,000 a month, but it could be double or triple that easily if you have, a full-time chef, or if you have a nanny, chef, landscapers. It depends on how large the land is, around the home. But the maintenance costs can be quite high, both for houses and private jets, obviously. But, most of these families, they're not worried about $100,000 a year cost. It's like a quote unquote normal, just normal high net worth individual having a, $8,000 a year cost or $5,000 a year cost. But getting tied up in that very expensive property that you can't unwind easily, I think, is the most expensive part of the mistake.
Yeah, exactly. Because as you described, if they didn't negotiate hard to get into it and the house has been sitting there for 7 to 10 years, it might well sit there another 7 to 10 years when they want to sell it, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think that their realities are changing so quickly. What I find is that after a liquidity event, most families don't take the time to actually sit down, get very clear on what is the new reality they want to live within. What do they want to be doing with their time every day? Do they want to sit on a beach, or do they want to run 10 different businesses now instead of one, or build another $100 million platform company or real estate portfolio? And I think if you're super clear on that and where you come from, what your values are, priorities are, then that can direct your energy. But a lot of families get liquid. They just start investing with individuals who have access to them, and most of them are startups or people with an idea and a dream that they want someone else to fund and take the risk on financially. So they do a lot of bad investments. They spread their money all over the place with almost no focus, which they think is diversifying, but they've just diversified into a whole bunch of very risky bets instead of going into conservative cash flowing assets, that can kind of protect their capital a bit more. And that's why people, I think, go in and buy sometimes several or one very expensive home, is they're not super clear yet on exactly that reality they want to be in. It's pretty rare for a family to have great clarity on that and be able to explain that to another person.
That's a really great point. And not everybody wants to live their life the same way, just like you described. Some people are done with their business and they want to be on the beach, and others, like you said, they're very involved in it still and have the earnout part of it that they have to fulfill. So that thinking and that planning, I could see where that would be really crucial.
Yeah, and the thing is, everybody gets pitched very expensive things once you become wealthy. Whether it's expensive cars or services or concierge solutions or even experiences you may enjoy doing. It really doesn't cost anything but your time to get really highly intentional about where you want to go. And we see it from the perspective of setting up a single family office, but this comes true with philanthropy. Should you just give money away to whoever has access to you, whoever you've known the longest, or should it be about the causes you care about and you're most passionate about? It also is true with direct investments. We work a lot with families on developing their direct investment strike zone and being very clear on the synergies and strategies they want to put to use so they can, dominate a small niche area or really leverage the IP and distribution networks they may have had built up during their first liquidity event. And when you're intentional, then things can be aligned and highly integrated. And when you're not, that's when there's a lot of friction and then your decisions are fighting each other.
Yeah, exactly. So recently, the hedge fund industry has been in the news because there's been a lot of change there. And some of the top hedge fund professionals I noticed that live in Connecticut are moving to Florida, or they're moving to other places. But it seems like there are trends out of certain states, out of New Jersey. 44% of people want to leave New Jersey, they report. It's crazy, the migration trends that are happening around the country. Are you seeing people wanting to move to certain locations and other locations being unattractive, and even past popular locations like Aspen, and very expensive homes in Aspen look like they are not selling like they used to? Are you seeing that?
For sure, I'm seeing that a lot. And, it's a reason why I live in Florida. In all of the United States, I would only live in Florida, Texas, Arizona, Nevada. I can't think of anywhere else I would really even consider living. And for a while, I started my business in Boston and grew it in Oregon. And I realized the state of Oregon doesn't want you there if you're running a business. They want craft breweries and pro marijuana, people, and they really kick you out of the state if you're making money. They say, get out of here, go to another state if you actually want to grow a business and have a bunch of employees. So we did just that, and I moved my whole company all the way across the country to a place with palm trees and no income tax and more friendly business environment. And there's a lot more wealth and family offices here as well. And we just found that we've been able to triple our business since moving. And I find that a lot of families are coming down to Texas and Florida most. I think Arizona beats out Nevada, but I hear about Texas and Florida the most, and a slightly stronger slant towards Texas because it's in the middle of the country for those that have a large operating business that involves a lot of travel, and a slightly more of a slant towards Florida for those northeastern families that want to be able to just fly up the East Coast real quick to New York and back the same day and maybe don't have to travel all over the U.S., routinely.
Mm-hmm. Well, recently I saw there was a $111 million home purchased in Florida, and it was a new record. So that seems like they're buying at the top of the market, and like you're saying, if they're not really paying attention to market trends, couldn't that be a problem, or is it a status symbol to be buying at the top and they don't care?
I think there's 5 different answers to your questions. I'll try to answer them very, very quickly. So basically, like on the one hand, some of these people don't care, and they don't care. They get tired of the constant scrutiny of the public perception of every breath they take in life because they're so wealthy and everything's being trashed because they're famous. So on one level, they're kind of like, well, this is a personal asset. I wanted to do it, so I did it, and I don't care what people think. And that's totally fine. I think it's more about, the other way to look at it is it's more about the family who's worth, let's say 20 or 30 million or 150 or 200 million. And, like one of my clients, went on a $3 million vacation, for example. Another client, bought 5 private jets, in the first year after a liquidity event. And if their burn rate is too high, it's just not sustainable. Or if it's not in line with their goals, then it's bad. If their goals are to spend every dollar they made, as long as they're giving away $10 million to each of their heirs, or if they wanted to, meet some other objectives of the foundation, or grow a 1,000-person company and give back to society through employment, that's, more power to them for whatever they want to get done. But some families really do care about being a good steward of their wealth. And if they don't realize how illiquid buying a home at the top of the market could be, that's where it could be a really expensive mistake. And the last part of your question was about it being a status symbol. And, I think families do like to use money to have status symbol pieces of real estate, but I think it's when it's a really fun, interesting property where there's a great experience on it. Like we had a past client who owned a whole zip code that had a horse ranch and hunting grounds and a lake and teepees, and families could come there and go camping. And he closed very large business deals and managed over $1 billion, in part because he had that great property to give people an amazing life experience for their whole family. Another past speaker at our family office club events bought a church. It was over 10,000 square feet on top of a hill that become an eyesore because it was empty. They remodeled it and made it their headquarters. And it's an amazing thing to go in there and see how they operate out of the place and what they've done with it. So I think that there's some examples where, it's a little bit of a status symbol because it's such a fun experience, or it's such a cool asset to have, and it helps conduct business. But I don't think that a lot of families are really competing against each other who spent the most on their personal home, because I see it as, if it has to be judged, maybe it's a little bit of a dumb investment. And so, I think it's different when it's a business asset and it can be used, and that might be more of a status symbol.
Right. Do you think there's a trend to own more or fewer homes? Are people going one way or the other?
I think fewer. I think that the subscription world we live in, and different luxury home sites where you can, lease the homes or, pay a subscription of $2,500 a month and then have access to these villas, around the world, or, just stay in different Four Seasons residences, or, that type of a quality location around the world, I think is a more simple way for families to be operating. So I think a lot of families that I speak with, are trying to have just one or two core assets in their portfolio and then be, renting or leasing. And in the past, they may have had, 3 to 5 houses on their balance sheet. And they just find it more simple not to deal with all of the oversight needed, just their time and having to deal with it, and then hiring staff to oversee it. They'd rather just pay what would look like to the normal person a very expensive per night fee.
Yeah, I'm totally on that page. I just think the upkeep has got to be a nightmare for a lot of people to keep track of all that, and can be overwhelming at times when they'd rather be doing some other things, even though they can pay other people to do it still.
And liability. Every time you have a property and you have anyone there cleaning, or anyone even delivering something, or anyone visiting, and you own the property and people know you're very wealthy, they might be that much more likely to slip and hit their neck on the stair on their way in the door, right? So I think that these people become targets, and they realize that. So the more that they can remove themselves from being targets, the better.
Yeah. How do you advise people to plan for multiple home ownership and locations?
A lot of my families they made their wealth in one area, but their family is from another area. They might be from Brazil, or they might be from New York, but they now live in Florida or Texas. So a lot of times they just have homes in those two locations. Other times they have office locations in 2 or 3 cities. So they just have homes in those 2 or 3 cities. They need to be in London a week out of the month, and the rest of the time they're in Boston or Chicago. So usually it's just, 1 to 2, at most 3, based on where they have big extended family, where they grew up, versus where their business or where they're located now. And that's typically, we try to get families to think about doing less rather than more almost at every turn, to maybe lease or just use a private jet, club or a timeshare, versus owning several private jets, or doing less direct investments and having them be more focused so that they have synergies with each other and can be, cross-selling clients between the different entities, et cetera. And then you learn a lot faster. So less is more, I think, in the family office space. It gives you more power when you're doing a less number of things, I think.
Yeah, well, that's one of the beauties of having someone like you to advise them, because you've seen people make mistakes and you can advise them to do things to stay away from those mistakes.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Some of the most powerful advice I think that we give in the Family Office Club is in some of our books for $3 to $5, where we say, we interview family offices and we say, what's the $100,000 mistake that other people could avoid? Or what's your most expensive mistake you've ever made? Or, I'll list off 5 mistakes that are the most expensive ones I see people make while speaking at a wealth advisory conference or a tax institute event lately. And I think that sometimes people go to conferences or they join organizations because they want to get a big deal done. And whether they're raising capital for a deal or looking for one, that's great. That can be exciting. But just avoiding some of the biggest mistakes. I actually just started listening to an Audible book last night. We've been sharing these top mistakes for the last 12 years in the Family Office Club. But last night I started listening to this Audible book called The Road Less Stupid. And that's basically what we're trying to help family offices navigate. Is like, okay, well, I can't tell you a cookie cutter plan for exactly what you should do every day inside your family office, but I can tell you for sure, don't do these 10 things because almost everybody does them. And they're very costly and almost never smart to do.
Well, Richard, I have always enjoyed listening to you talk about those mistakes on the Family Office Club podcast, and I recommend anyone listening now tune into your podcast. Where else can people find you and learn more from you?
We share a lot on YouTube. We've got a couple hundred free videos there. We also host 32 live events a year. And you can see the event schedule at familyoffices.com. Our next event's actually a 700-person event at the Ritz-Carlton with 75 family offices on stage. And, I appreciate you having me here on the podcast. Of course, if you want to come as our guest for having me on here, I'm happy to have you come check out one of our next events coming up when we're near you, as our guest.
Thank you. Well, thank you for being on the show, Richard. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thanks for having me on here. Anytime.
Thank you for listening to Be Wealthy and Smart with Linda P. Jones. Share the wealth and tell your family and friends about the show. Check out our website, blog, and social media for more riches at www.bewealthyandsmart.com.